Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairy Tales. If you've never been here before, my name is Rory and you are watching Varietal Literature's YouTube channel, a cozy little corner of the internet for those who love narrative. And what we're going to do here tonight is read old folklore and fairy tales, specifically from a collection by translator Simon Roy Hughes, collected by Asbjornsen and Moe, the very famous, if you don't know them, that's okay, the very famous, the Grimm brothers of Norwegian folklore. Traditionally, a lot of that was not translated, or at least was not translated well to English. So Simon Roy Hughes has recently done that. So we're going to be reading stories from that book. If you are not watching this live, you should know that down in the description below there will be timestamps, and you can click on whatever story you want to read. We are going to read 3 stories today, and those stories, pardon me, we are going to read 3 stories today. They are thematically somewhat unrelated, but that's okay. I'm just sort of reading through these stories with you from Simon Roy Hughes' massive collection. I will say, if you are also not watching this live and haven't skipped ahead at this point, down in the pinned comment below, I will have a link where you can buy the books yourself, and you should, because they are self-published and funded by a Patreon for him to spend many years translating them, and it is important work. To me, anyways. Maybe not for everybody. If you are watching this live, though, there is a live chat, which is already blooming with a good crop of little potatoes, such as Tammy Morelli, Uncle Kitty, Jum's Store, GS, and I'm sure many others lurking. In fact, I know for sure many others lurking. Tammy says she is going to go camping. Love camping. Is that like car camping, or are you putting on a backpack and hiking a ways? Uncle Kitty's never been camping. That's so odd to me, but I think it's more common in Canada that everybody goes camping, because we have a lot of forest and stuff. I know America has some pretty broad suburbs and city centers that don't really have a lot of forest, so maybe it's not as odd down there. Jump Store is going to a concert tomorrow. Oh, I remember you were talking about this last week. That's excellent. Oh, Tammy already answered my question. We set up a big camp, bring 5 of our horses. There's 4-wheelers and motorcycles. Ooh, wow. You gonna do barbecue too? Okay, Uncle Kitty says, in my hometown, the only people who go camping are actually hunting, deer, or fishing. I mean, we do have a lot of hunting up here. Fishing as well, yeah. Especially where I live, which is like a rainforest. Tammy says we go all the way up in the Colville National Forest. I don't know where that is, but I'm sure it's beautiful. Uncle Kitty says, or more likely getting drunk or high. Well, there's definitely that at a Canadian campsite. All right. Let me talk you through a little bit about what we're going to talk about story-wise, and let's get into the stories. We're going to look at 3 stories tonight. The first one called The Boy Who Went to the North Wind and Demanded Back His Flower, which is such a good name. Then we're going to read the second story we're going to read is the namesake story, The Virgin Mary as Godmother. And then finally we're going to read a story called The 3 Princesses of Hvittenland. Hvittenland. I did ask Simon Roy Hughes for guidance on that, and I think I've successfully not used any of it. When we get to The Virgin Mary as Godmother, hopefully I'll remember. There is a little, Simon recommended that I read a little bit of the footnotes and stuff about it. So hopefully I'll remember and do that, because it does add interest to it. But I would like to do it after I read the story. All right. Uncle Kitty says drugs and alcohol are endemic in Ohio. Well, I mean, I feel like they're endemic anywhere where there isn't a lot to do and there's a lot of forest to hide in or fields or things like that. Okay. No reason for me to delay. Glad to see all you folks. It is quite warm here. How is it where you are? Is Jumstore still drinking tea in this heat? I already know the answer is yes. Let's move on to the first story because I will get too hot. And then we'll have to stop or turn on my fan, which makes the sound worse. Our first tale of the night comes to us from the complete Norwegian folk tales and legends of Asbjornsen and Moe, a very famous 19th century collection collected by Asbjornsen and Moe, but translated by Simon Roy Hughes, contemporary translator. You can and should buy this self-published book. This is just one volume of it. There are 3 volumes, and they're excellent stories from Aventir Books. And our first story that we're going to read tonight is called The Boy Who Went to the North Wind and Demanded Back His Flower. Once upon a time, there was an old wife who had a son. She was pathetic and fragile. And so the boy should go out to the stubber for her to fetch some porridge flour for dinner. Stubber is a storehouse in Norway. Just like a shed of food, if you really want to strip it down to brass tacks. But when he stepped out onto the stubber step again, then the north wind came blustering and took the flour from him and went straight into the air with it. Well, the boy went back into the stubber for some more, but when he stepped out onto that step, the north wind came again and took the flour from him. And so it went the 3rd time too. Well, the boy grew angry at this, and he thought it unreasonable that the north wind should treat him so. So he thought he would search him out and demand his flour back. Well, he set off, but the way was long, and he walked, 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 till finally he came to the north wind. "Good day," said the boy, "and thank you for last time." "Good day," replied the north wind, who had a gruff voice, "and thank you for last time yourself. What do you want?" he said. "Well," said the boy, "I want to ask you if you'd be so kind as to return to me the flour you took from me on the stabber step, for we have only a little, and when you behave in that way and take from us what little we have, there's nothing left but starving to death." "I do not have any flour," said the north wind, "but since you are in such need, then you shall have a tablecloth that will provide all you can if you but say, 'Tablecloth, unfold yourself and set yourself with all manner of costly fare.'" And there's a picture here for those who are either unable to look or for one reason or another, of the boy walking out of the stubber, and all that, I think it was oat flour, being blown away on the wind, his hair tousled forward, and he's sort of leaning his back against the wind on the steps. So quite a detailed picture for a storybook picture. The boy was well satisfied with this. Now, as home was so far away that he could not reach it that day, he went into an inn along the way, and when those who were there should eat their supper, he laid the tablecloth on a table that stood in the corner and said, "Tablecloth, unfold yourself and set yourself with all manner of costly fare." and everyone thought it a wonderful thing. Oh, sorry, he had said it before the tablecloth had done so. And everyone thought it a wonderful thing, but no one liked it more than the innkeeper's wife. Here was no big fuss with roasting or boiling, with covering or setting, with fetching or laying out on the table, she thought. So as the night drew on and everyone slept, she took the tablecloth and laid another in its stead, which was exactly like the one he had got from the north wind, but could not bring forth even an oat loaf, which is like a flatbread, I think unleavened, sort of like, kind of like a really coarse, rough pancake, if you will. It's that flatbread that exists in all cultures, actually. Just whatever grains around, they mix with water and they press onto a hot surface. When the boy awoke, he took the tablecloth and set off with it. Now, he said, I have been to the north wind. He was a reasonable man, for he gave me this tablecloth. If I but say to it... Sorry, skipped a sentence there. When the boy awoke, he took the tablecloth and set off with it, and that day he came home to his mother. Then he said, Now, he said, I've been to the north wind. He was a reasonable man, for he gave me this tablecloth. But if I say to it, Tablecloth, unfold yourself and set yourself with all manner of costly fare, then I get everything I wish for. Well, I'm sure you do, said his mother, but I won't believe it before I see it. Well, the boy hurried to bring it out a table, laid the tablecloth on it, and said, Tablecloth, unfold yourself and set yourself with all manner of costly fare. Ha ha! But the tablecloth did not even set itself with some flatbread. There's nothing for it but that I got to go to the north wind again then, said the boy, and he set off on his way. At greater than great length, he arrived at where the north wind dwelt. Good evening, said the boy. Good evening, said the north wind. I want what is right in exchange the flower you took from me, said the boy. The tablecloth I got was not good for much. I do not have any flower, said the north wind. But there is a buck that drops gold ducats. If only you say, my buck make money. Well, the boy had nothing against this. Now he was so far from home that he could not reach it that same day, so he went to the inn and the innkeeper again, and before he ordered anything he tried the buck, for he wanted to see if what the north wind had said was true. And when the innkeeper saw it, he thought it a fine buck. And the boy had hardly fallen asleep before he took another, which did not drop gold ducats, and placed it in his stead. The following morning the boy set off on his way, and when he came home he said, The north wind is a kind man after all. He gave me a buck that can make gold ducats, if only I say, my buck make money. Oh, I'm sure that it's nothing more than talk, said his mother. I will not believe it before I see it. My buck make money, said the boy, but it certainly was not money the buck made. I like the implication there. So he set off on his way to the north wind again, and he said that the buck was good for nothing, and that he wanted what was right for the flower. Well, now I have nothing to give you but the old stick that stands over there in the corner, said the North Wind. "It is such that when you say, 'My sticks strike,' then it will continue striking until you say, 'My stick stands still.' Since the way was long, the boy went into the inn and the innkeeper that night, and since he could guess how things had gone with the tablecloth and the buck, he laid down immediately and began to snore on the bench, pretending to be asleep. Well, the innkeeper could understand that the stick was also good for something, so he searched out for one that resembled it, and went to put it there in its stead, but he heard the boy snoring. But just as the innkeeper was about to take the stick, the boy shouted, "My stick, strike!" And the stick began to strike and beat the innkeeper so that he jumped over both table and bench and shouted and screamed, oh my God, ask the stick to stop or it will beat me to death. You shall have back both the tablecloth and the buck." Well, the boy thought the innkeeper had seen enough, and so he said, "My stick stands still." And then he stuck the tablecloth in his pocket, and took his stick in his hand and bound a rope about the buck's horn, and went home with everything all together, and that was a good return on some handfuls of flour. I don't even know the context. I just looked at the chat. Uncle Kitty said, "I live in a sea of morons." This is a great turn of phrase. All right. Just lining this up a bit. All the PDFs are slightly different, fortunately. Tammy says Bigfoot Rory. I appreciate what is probably trying to give me context. I did look back up, but I don't know if that tells me. JS is reminding me to read the footnotes. I'm going to read the footnotes after, but thank you for reminding me. You'll understand why when we get to them. The question, though, that the footnotes discuss, that I want you to think about, is whether you think this is actually about the Virgin Mary or not, and why. And, I don't know. The answer may surprise you. However clickbait works. Okay. This one does take place in a forest, but I'm feeling warm, so let's make it a cooler forest. Our next tale is called The Virgin Mary as Godmother. And it is an unexpected tale given its title. It comes to us from Simon Roy Hughes, again, translated by Simon Roy Hughes, I should say, collected by Asbjornsen and Moe for their collection, The Complete Norwegian Folktales and Legends of Asbjornsen and Moe. A book put out recently. It's self-published by Simon Roy Hughes, a translator from Norway. And I encourage you to buy it. So let's read this story. Far, far away, In a great forest, there once lived a couple of poor folk. The wife was confined and bore a child, a beautiful daughter. But as they were so poor, they didn't know how they should bring their child to her baptism. The husband had therefore to go out one day to look for godparents who could help. He walked the whole day, both to one and to another, and everyone said they would like to be godparents, but none thought they could afford to help. Now, I should say, I don't know specifically what the cost of baptism was at this time, but this has sounded like a lot of money. When he was walking home that evening, he met a gorgeous lady wearing magnificent clothes, and who looked so inwardly good and kind. She offered to bring the child to her baptism, but then afterwards, that beautiful woman would keep her. The man replied that he would have to ask his wife what she thought, but when he came home and told her, the wife just said no. The next day the man went out again, but no one could afford to be a godparent for all his asking. As he walked home again in the evening, he again met the gorgeous lady who looked so glad, and she made him the same offer. He told his wife what had happened to him, and she said that if he couldn't find godparents for the child next day, then they should or would at least relent to letting the lady have her, and since she looked so good and kind. There's a lovely picture of their little humble cottage in the forest. It's a sort of a scratchy pen drawing if you're not watching. And has some high hills behind it that are well populated by what look to be sort of fir and pine trees. And then it's a little thatched roof, really standard log house. On the third day, the man went out and still could not find any godparents. And when he met the lady again in the evening, he promised her the child, if only she would give her a baptism and Christendom. In the morning, therefore, she, together with 2 menfolk, came to where the man lived, took the child, and went to church with her, where she was baptized. Then she took her home with her, and for several years the little girl lived with her there. And her foster mother was always good and kind towards her. When the girl had grown so big that she had learned to understand her foster mother, her foster mother made ready to travel away. "You have permission to go where you will," she said to the girl, "just not the 3 chambers that I shall now show you." And then she traveled away. But the young girl could not leave off opening one of the chamber doors a little, and whoosh, out flew a star. And when she returned, her foster mother was sad, and threatened to chase her foster daughter away. But the child wept and begged until she was finally allowed to stay. After a while, her foster mother should travel away again, and so she forbade the girl from going into the 2 chambers she hadn't been in. She promised the little girl to control herself, but when she'd been alone for a while and thought and wondered what might be in the 2nd chamber, she could not help but open the door just a crack to look inside, and whoosh! Out flew the moon. And when her foster mother returned and saw that the moon had been let out, she grew sorrowful. and said that now she could not keep her any longer, not by any means. Now she had to leave. But the girl wept so heartily and pleaded so beautifully that she was allowed to stay this time as well. A time afterwards, her foster mother should travel away again. The girl was half grown by this time, and so she laid it heavily upon her heart that she must not, by any means, go or even look into the third chamber. But when her foster mother had been away for a while, well, the girl had been alone for a long time, and had grown both weary and bored, and she thought, well, it would be fun to look a little into the third chamber. She thought at first that she would not do so for the sake of her foster mother, but when she thought about it for a second time, she could not prevent herself. She thought she would go to look into the chamber, just quickly, just a little snap of the door and look. So she opened the door a crack, and whoosh! Out flew the sun. And we have a picture of that here. A young girl with her back to us, opening a door, and a sun with a big smiley face carrying off into the sky. Also a beautiful picture. When her foster mother now returned and saw that the sun had flown out, she was simply aghast, and said that she could now by no means be allowed to stay with her any longer. Her foster daughter wept and pleaded even more beautifully than before, but it didn't do any good. Now, no, I must punish you, said her mother, but you may choose. You shall either be the most beautiful lady of all, though you will be unable to speak, or you shall be the ugliest of all, yet be able to speak. But leave me you must. But then I would prefer to be beautiful, said the girl, and that's what she was too, and from that hour she was mute. And when she had come away from her foster mother, she walked and wandered through a great, great forest, and howsoever she walked, there was no end to it. When it drew towards evening, she clambered up a large tree that hung over a spring and sat to sleep through the night. Well, close by lay a castle, and in the morning the maid came from it to fetch some water. From the spring for the prince's tea. The maid saw in the reflection of the spring a beautiful face, and thought it was her. She threw down the water butt, ran home again, and struck her neck, saying, I am so beautiful that I am too good to be carrying water. Then another should go for the water, but things went the same with her. She too came back saying that she was too beautiful and too good to go for water for the prince. So the prince himself went, for he wanted to see what was going on, and let's face it, he wanted his tea. And when he came to the spring, he too saw the image and immediately looked up. And then he became aware of the most beautiful maiden up in that tree. And he beckoned her down and took her home with him, and eventually would have her for his queen, for she was so beautiful. But his mother, who had yet lived, would not allow it. She cannot talk, she said, and she may well be a witch. But the prince did not give in until he got her. And when they had lived together for a time, she was with child, and when she should give birth, the prince set a strong guard around her. But at the hour of delivery, they all fell asleep. And when she'd given birth, her foster mother came and cut the child's little finger and smeared its blood around the queen's mouth and on her fingers and said to her, "Now shall you be as sorrowful as I was when you let out the star." And then she disappeared with the child. And when those who stood guard had awoken, they thought that the queen had eaten her own child. The old queen would have burned her. But the prince held her so dear and eventually pleaded her free from punishment. But it was a close thing. The second time the young queen should be confined, the guard was twice as strong on the previous occasion, but things went exactly the same way, except that her foster mother said, "Now you shall be as sorrowful as I was when you let out the moon." And the queen wept and pleaded, for she could talk when her foster mother was there. And that's what we call in writing convenient world building. But it did not help. Now, the old queen would certainly have her burned, but the prince pleaded for her to be freed this time too. And when the queen for the third time should be confined, the guard around her was tripled. But things went the same way. Her foster mother came while the guard slept, took the child, cut its little finger, and smeared its blood around the queen's mouth. And then she said that the queen would now be as sorrowful as she had been herself when she had let out the sun. Now, the prince by no means could save her. She had to and should burn. But just as they let her up onto the pyre, they suddenly saw her foster mother coming with all 3 children. She led 2 by the hand and carried the third in her arms, and she went over to the young queen and said, "Here are your children, and now you shall have them back. I am the Virgin Mary. As sorrowful as you now have been, was I when you let out the sun, the moon, and the star. You have now suffered your punishment for what you did, and from now on you shall be able to speak again." How glad the queen and the prince grew can easily be imagined, but no one can ever express it. They were ever happy afterwards, and the prince's mother, who held the young queen dear from that time. GS says, "I love how mutes can't write or draw pics of what happened." Indeed. Consistent question. Okay. Now, if you're a regular viewer of this, we're going to look at the footnote here, but if you're a regular viewer of this, or you know a fair bit about folklore, you're familiar with the concept of Christianization of folklore. It was a theory put forward by a lot of people, but probably most famously put forward by the Grimm brothers. The Grimm brothers had a view that was popular for the 19th century in particular, and one that, as Bjornson and Moe picked up, I think pretty much from the Grimm brothers, which is a lot of things in these folklore tales that make reference to, Jesus or whatever else, didn't initially make reference to Jesus. They were later done that way for the very specific reason of kind of removing paganism from the culture and replacing it with Christianity. Now, I'm not denying that there is some validity to that, but what I will say, and what more sort of modern observations about folklore contend, is that maybe that is a brush that is swept a bit too broadly. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to read all of these things, but I am going to read you actually Moe's notes on this, which describes some other versions of the tale. which isn't going to immediately matter, but it matters when we read Simon Roy Hughes' footnote. So these are notes from Moe, I believe, on the Virgin Mary as godmother. Primary narrative from Hole in Ringerik. Probably mispronouncing that, but that's where he collected it from. In Odal, Succursal Parish to Norderhof, a roughly similar folk tale is told. The girl's name there is Solia. The Virgin Mary drives the sun, the moon, and the star in again, but with much trouble, and when Solia is chased away, she has a choice between being black as earth, though she owns the whole world, and becoming so beautiful that gold drips from her, though she be mute. A legend about St. Peter, this is Moe's wording here, has by mistake been subsumed into this variant. We've talked about this before. St. Peter was a really common figure in folklore in Europe. From Odlin, this is a second variation of this tale. The father meets an old man who promises to procure godparents. When he comes home, he finds it full up of everything, food in the pantry, and beer and spirits in the cellar. The following Friday, a carriage arrives in which sits our Lord, Saint Peter, and the Virgin Mary, who holds the child during its baptism. She asks to take it with her, and when the Virgin Mary subsequently travels to church, her goddaughter, as in the primary folktale, releases the stars, the moon, and the sun. The rest also agrees with what is already told. And the third variation, a corresponding tale from Sildra in Valders. The beginning agrees with the primary narrative, the only difference being the man meets the devil. He wants to be the godfather, but on the condition that no one says, "God help you," if he sneezes 3 times during its birth. God, folklore is weird. The man agrees to this because he believes that someone of understanding will say, "God help you." When the devil sneezes once, twice, no one notices, but when he sneezes a 3rd time, the child gets up in the cradle and says, "God help you, dash you. If I'd thought of this, then I would have put something in your ear," says the devil, and goes on his way. Okay, so reading that, some of the other variations, let's look at Simon's notes, because it was Moe's view that this story, and it's not hard to understand why, that this story that we just read was originally about a figure that we'll see. A pagan goddess. And it's not, like, it really isn't hard to see why he would believe that, because so much of this doesn't seem anything to do with the Virgin Mary, right? Like, we're talking about, the sun, the moon, and the stars being released. That doesn't seem to be anything to do with the Virgin Mary. That seems like something that you would expect from a pagan god or something. Or at least a figure of legend of folklore. Not, the mother of Jesus. So, let's flip forward a bit here to Simon Roy's sort of rebuttal on that idea. Okay. So I'm going to read for you in its entirety Simon Roy Hughes' notes on this, and then we'll read our last story of the night. Collected on 10 occasions across the south of the country, first appeared in the initial edition of, probably going to say this wrong, Norsk Folkventur, previously published in English as The Lassie and Her Godmother in George Webb's Descent. Popular Tales from the Norse, Child of Mary, blah, 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 blah. These are other books that published it. The tale is one of the 11 that Jørgen Moe recorded on his first collection tour. In his introduction to the second edition of Norsk Folkventur, Moe claims a relationship between this tale and the skaldic poem Grimnismal, specifically concerning how Frigg lives here on Earth nurturing children. The imposition of the Virgin Mary for Frigg is, he says, a result of the suppression of the old faith by Christianity. The gods soon, this is a quote now, the gods soon enfolded themselves in persons who belonged to the holy story, and then the latter received the motifs of the heroes and gods of paganism one by one. So that's Moe's opinion. Simon carries on. But Frigg nurtures only one named boy, Ingrimnazil. I said that wrong. She is not presented as a more general mother figure. Mo also leaves the related folktales from other traditions that he and Jes Bjornson list in their notes unaccounted for, unless there has been a southwards migration of all the folktales or an identical development from pagan to Christian imagery in every place these folktales have been recorded. In either unlikely case, the lizard and Basil's related tale remains wholly unaccounted for, and a small suggestion of support for Mo's position may be found in the second variant given in Jes Bjornson and Mo's notes, which we just read. However, the carriage in which sits our Lord Saint Pierre and the Virgin Mary arrives on Frigg's Day, or Friday, rather than on a Thursday, which would be more typical of Norwegian folktales. Of the 10 collected Norwegian variants, noted by Hotne, 4 have titles such as Solia or Soldia, which may suggest a conflation of the hagiography of Saint Odile of Alsace, who was baptized Solde. So what does all of that mean? It means that, as a general theory, the idea that Mo proposes that, these figures are pagan, it has some purchase. It has probably some reality to it. But to just sort of reference it as a default without any sort of further observation of the patterns of how it was collected, how the story traveled, all of that kind of stuff, is a bit premature. It's sort of like looking for support rather than looking at the pattern before you and deciding what it tells you. And, Simon's point there is, it seems weird that it's kind of always about the Virgin Mary then. You think you would find other characters get folded into this, if that was indeed what's happening. And I do think that there's a tendency for people to... How do I say this? There's a tendency for people to look at Christian figures in folklore as sort of late arriving. But I think that misses just how far back the influence of Christianity goes in Europe. Like, even the periods of time that a lot of like neo-pagan movements sort of romanticize, like Viking era and whatever else. This is a pretty Christian era. It wasn't like it just popped out of the ground in the 15th century. It was always around. Exactly how it was conceptualized is a bit different. Obviously, these cultures were primed to see things in pagan terms. And so you see, there's that rather famous story of when missionaries went to Tonga. I think it was Tonga anyways. And introduced the story of Jesus. They were like, oh, hey, cool. You have a shaman. We have shamans, right? And they were like, well, no, he's not a shaman. But in their terms, he basically is. I think there's some of that going on for sure, where people will conceptualize these stories of Christianity as just one of many in the pantheon of sort of gods that they already know. And I think that might inform how things like the Virgin Mary get characterized. But there isn't a lot of reason to believe that there weren't just folk tales about the Virgin Mary and St. Peter and stuff, and they weren't transfigurations of older tales. They just were formed about those characters. Anyways, there you go. There's a little bit on the Virgin Mary as godmother. Let's look at the three princesses of Hvittenland. Which is our last tale of the night, but it is definitely a journey. It is also a tale that pulls a lot of features from stories I've read before, which you'll notice as we go, but it also takes completely different paths to get there. It has a little bit of east of the sun, west of the moon kind of going on in it, and so on. It also has one of the weirdest conceits, and that's saying a lot. It's not that the individual pieces of it are unusual. I've seen versions of the pieces of the situation, but they kind of mash them together and they don't explain why they're related. Jess likes the drawing. Yes, this front page of this story has a drawing of what looks like a root lump with a face, a big long frowny toothy face and big eyes, and sort of a nose without a nose, big open sinuses, poking its head out of the surface of a water. Our next tale is called The Three Princesses from Hvittenland. And it comes to us from the Complete Norwegian Folk Tales and Legends of Asbjørnsen and Moe, a collection by Asbjørnsen and Moe, but recently translated by Simon Roy Hughes. This is just volume 1. You should absolutely support it by clicking on the link in the pinned comment below. Hashtag not sponsored, just really like the book. There was once upon a time a fisherman who lived close by the castle and fished for the king's table. One day when he was out fishing, he caught nothing, no matter how he baited his hooks. Whether he baited and fished, or fished and baited, not a bone hung on that hook. But as the day drew on towards evening, he had a head bobbed up from the water and said, "If I guess what your wife bears beneath her belt, then you shall have fish enough." Well, the man quickly agreed, yes, for he knew not that she was with child. But if I could just pause for a second. Even if she's not with child, what possible thing could have been trivial but under that belt? Anyways. And then he caught fish enough, as many as he would have. Now when he came home in the evening and told of how he had caught all the fish, his wife began to weep and lament, and on account of the promise her husband had made, and asked God to help her, she bore a child beneath her belt, she said. Well, there were soon questions about why the wife was so sorrowful. Up at the castle, when the king heard of it, he promised to take the child in and make sure to save it. Time passed, and time went by, and when it was time, the wife bore a boy child, and the king took him in. And brought him up as his own son, until the boy was grown. Then one day the boy asked for leave to go out fishing with his father. He had such an inner desire to do so, he said. Now the king was loath to allow it, but finally the boy was given leave. He went with his father, and things went well enough. At first. And indeed good enough all day, at first, until they came into land again in the evening. Well, the boy forgot his kerchief, and thought he should run down to the boat to fetch it, but as soon as he got into it, the boat set off with him. And so the water rushed by, and no matter how he strove to pull against it with the oars, it did no good, and it went all night. And at length he came far, far away to a white beach. There he went ashore, and when he had walked a distance, he met an old man with a long white beard. "What is this place called?" said the boy. Hvittenland, replied the man. And then he asked the boy to tell him where he was from and what he wanted, and the boy told him. Well, said the man, when you go along the beach here, you will come to 3 kings' daughters who stand in the earth so that only their heads stick up. The first will call, she is the eldest, and ask so beautifully for you to come and help her. The second one will too, and you should go to neither of them. But the third you should go to and do what she asks of you, and that will be your happiness, it will. And when the boy came to the first of the princesses, she called to him and asked so beautifully that he should come to her, but he walked on as if he hadn't even seen her. Which, by the way, wasn't in his instructions. Could have said hello. And he went past the second in the same way, but he approached the third. If you will do as I say, then you may have which of 3 of us you will, said the princess. Well, yes, he would like that. And so she told him that the 3 trolls had buried the 3 of them in the ground here. But before, they had lived in the castle he could see away in the forest. Now you should go into the castle and let the trolls whip you for a night for each of us, she said. If you can withstand it, then you shall save us. Well, yes, replied the boy, he would certainly try. As you go in, continued the princess, there are 2 lions standing in the gate. But if you walk right between them, then they will not harm you. Go straight ahead into a small, dark room, and there you shall lie down, and then the troll will come to beat you. Now if you shall take the flask that hangs on the wall, and anoint yourself where he has beaten you, you shall grow just as well again. Grasp hold of the sword that hangs beside the flask, and hack the troll to death. Well, he did what the princess said. He walked right between the lions as if he didn't even see them. And straight into a small chamber in the castle. And there he laid down. And the first night there came a troll with 3 heads and 3 switches. Switches here, it's not a completely lost use of the word, but it's very uncommon to hear it this way. Switches are like whipping sticks, like long kind of willow sticks. Not like light switches. Anyways, there came a troll with 3 heads and 3 switches, and it whipped the boy sinfully. Which is a weird sentence in modern context, I think. But he held out until the troll was finished. Then he took the flask and anointed himself. Then he grasped the sword and hacked the troll to death. When he then came out in the morning, the princesses were above the ground to their belts. So, just to lay it out where we're at right now, a man lies in an empty castle, a troll beats him with sticks, and that means that the princesses are now waist deep in sand. I mean, he didn't even try to, dig them out. Is that maybe an option? The second night went the same way, but the troll that came in had 6 heads and 6 switches, and it whipped even worse than the first. But when he came out in the morning, the princess stood above the ground to their calves. Seems to me like they could just walk. The third night, there came a troll that had 9 heads and 9 switches, and it beat and whipped the boy until at last he fainted away. And then the troll took him and threw him against the wall. But he did so in a way that flask up on that wall just so happened to fall down and splash over the beaten boy. And then he was just as good again. He wasn't slow now. He grasped the sword and hacked the troll, probably not expecting him to even get up, to death. And when he came out of the castle that morning, the princess stood completely upon the earth. So they didn't even move when they got free. Is he going to walk for them? He jumps and moves their legs. So he took the youngest of them as queen and lived well and good with her for a long time. Eventually, though, he desired to travel home for a little to see his parents. And well, the queen wasn't so much for this idea, but as he yearned so much and ultimately ought to and had to go, she said to him, "One thing you must promise me, that you do what your father asks you, but not that which your mother asks you." He promised, and then she gave him a ring that was such that one who wore it could wish for two things, whatever he wanted, and so he wished to be home, consuming his first wish, and his parents couldn't stop wondering at how fine and beautiful he was. After he'd been at home some days, his mother said that he should go up to the castle so that the king could see what manner of man he'd become. His father said, "No, he ought not to do that, for that hour will not bring us any joy." But it didn't help. His mother begged and pleaded until he went. Now when he arrived up there, he was finer of clothes and all things than his foster father, who didn't much like it. He said, "Yes, but now you may see how my queen is. I cannot see yours. I don't think you have such a queen. So beautiful." "Oh, I just wish that she stood here so you could see," said the young king, and immediately she was there. But she was so sorrowful and said to him, "Why did you not do as I asked you, and listen to what your father said to you? Now I must soon go home again, and you've used both your wishes." And with that, she tied a ring into his hair, on which her name was written, and wished herself home again. Then the young king was full of grief, and went day out and day in, thinking only of how he might return to his queen. "I should see if there is anyone anywhere I might ask where she is," he thought, and so he went out into the world. And when he'd walked a while and he came to a mountain, there he met one who was lord of all the animals of the forest, for they came to him when he blew a horn he had. And so the king asked of Hvittenland. "Well, I don't know," replied the man, "but I shall ask my animals." And then he blew them in and asked if any of them knew where Hvittenland lay, but there were none that knew. So the man gave him a pair of skis. "When you stand on these," he said, "you shall come to my brother. He lives 100 leagues from here, and he is lord of all the birds of the air. Ask him. After you have arrived, then turn the skis around so that the ends point here, and they will come home by themselves." In the version that I remember of this sort of iteration of the story, just as a note here, it was a bunch of elderly women who were the sort of forebearers of all of this. Sorry about that. Troubles with my background. All right. When the king arrived, he turned the skis around as he was instructed. And as the Lord of the Animals had said, and they went back. He asked again of Hvittenland, and the man blew in all the birds, and asked if any of them knew where Hvittenland lay. No, none of them knew of it. A long time after the others had come, an old eagle came too, and she'd been away for 10 years, but she knew nothing of it either. I always love those little details in these stories. Like, why is that a detail? But there is all the birds coming in from the sky when he blows it, the horn. It's a little drawing. It's just of a flock of birds over our forest. Well, well, said the man. You may borrow a pair of skis from me, and when you stand on them you shall come to my brother who lives 100 leagues from here. He is lord of all the fish in the sea. You should ask him, but don't forget to turn the skis. And so the king thanked him and got on the skis, and when he'd come to he who was the lord of the fish of the sea, he turned them, and then they went back again. And then he asked of Hvittenland again. The man blew in all the fish, but none of them knew anything. Finally, an ancient old pike, of which we have a nice little drawing here of it, big toothy pike coming in on a wave, which he'd had a terrible time blowing in. And when he asked her, she said, Yes, I am very familiar there, for I have been a cook there for 10 years now. Tomorrow I am going there again, for it is then that the queen whom the king was lost to shall be holding a wedding with another. Since this is so, I shall give you some advice, said the man. Over here on a moor stands 3 brothers who have stood there for 100 years, fighting over a hat, a cloak, and a pair of boots. When one has these 3 things, he can make himself invisible and wish himself as far away as he wants. You can tell them that you want to try the things before passing judgment between them. So the king thanked him and went and did so. What is it you stand here forever fighting about? He said to the brothers. Let me try the things, and I will judge between you. And they agreed to this. And when he got the hat and the cloak and the boots, he said, When we meet next time, you shall hear the judgment. And with that, he wished himself on his way. As he flew through the air, he went the same way as the north wind. Where are you going? Asked the north wind. To Hvittenland, said the king, and then he told what had happened to him. Well, said the north wind, you're traveling a little faster than you are. I have to reach into every nook and gust and blow, I do. But when you arrive, then stand on the step beside the door. Then I shall come, howling as if I would blow down the whole castle. And when the prince who would have the queen comes out to see what is going on, you take him by the neck and you throw him out. And then I will see to get him to go away. Indeed, as the north wind had said, so the king did, and he stood on the step, and when that north wind came gusting and howling and blowing and whistling, he took a hold of the whole castle wall, and he shook it. Well, the prince came out to see what was going on, but immediately he came, the king took him by the neck and threw him right out the gate. And then the north wind took him up and left with him off over the sea. And when he was rid of him, the king went into the castle. At first, well, she didn't recognize him. For he had been traveling so far and had been so sorrowful that he didn't really look like himself. But when he showed her the ring, the one that she had woven into his hair when they last met, she grew heartily glad, and so the right wedding was held. What makes it right? Not too clear. Seems like some guy doesn't even know that she was married, to be honest. Which was asked about both far and wide. I would love to know this story from that guy's perspective. Just meets a beautiful woman, decides to get married, and then one day a man shows up on a beach, grabs him by the throat, and tosses him on the wind, which carries him out across the sea. What did I do wrong? And that is our last story of the night. As I had mentioned before, and I'll mention it one more time, you folks should get the, I think, annotated, because as you can see, the annotations are quite helpful. The annotated edition of the complete Norwegian Folktales and Legends of Asbjørnsen and Moe, translated by Simon Roy Hughes, which you can get the pinned comment down below. You can get it in a digital format, and you can get it in a physical format. I'm going to say what I said last time. Amazon has become increasingly not a source to trust for ebooks. They've imposed a bunch of restrictions on them that are concerning. So I think you should probably spring for the physical copy if you can. Tammy Morelli says, well, good night all. I hope you have a wonderful week, and thank you so much for the stories, Rory. They were great. Can't wait to tell you all how much fun camping was. Sweet dreams. Well, why don't you tell them some stories, Tammy? That is where all of these tales really were formed. GS says, yes, go annotated. I agree. Jumpstore says, if she was just going to forgive him and take him back anyways, she could have saved a lot of time and effort by just having him apologize instead of being coy. It's a very weird story. The logic through line is strange. Jumpstore says, rip to whoever the hell the second fiance was. I know. I feel like maybe there's some longer version of this tale where like it's more like that guy's the cause of it to an extent. Or knows and like moves in on it, because that is a formulation we see a lot, where like somebody plays a trick to get the rightful love out of the castle, and then they steal the woman, and then the hero comes back and stops it. Like, that's a really classic formulation, but it doesn't take the steps to do that. So as far as I can tell, just some random dude fell in love and wanted to get married, and then was tossed out on the wind for no reason that he can know. But, you know, I will say a lot of, like, folklore is like that, where it'll be like, you'll be reading a story and someone will be like, well, he picked up, a bag of gold when he was starving, but he picked it up while facing the sun. And so, of course, now he is tormented forever by gnomes in their torture den. Like, you'll be like, wait, what? What's this about the sun? I can imagine that the marrier would be saying, I feel like I have not been privy to critical need to know information, Uncle Kitty says. Jumpstore says, man was lucky she didn't have a husband for him. That's true. Or maybe the trolls were. Maybe that's how it works. All right. Well, it's very warm in here, so I'm going to set myself up to go. I'm glad you folks enjoyed the stories. Of course, if you do enjoy these stories, feel free to share them around, because that is the only way this video travels anywhere in the algorithm. As for me, Well, I'll keep the fireworm for you, although in this weather that might be a punishment. You folks have yourself a good sleep.